A scale insect outbreak has left me many crippled orchids this year. Some orchid leaves were severely dehydrated due to the necrotic intoxication that was caused by the scales as a result of feeding. Many orchids have lost some, if not all of their leaves. Some have lost the crown or the upper point of growth on a monopodial stem and therefore had stopped growing. This is due to the fact that I did not immediately pay any serious attention to the problem with these pests, and I underestimated the issue. This is why I lost several orchids, but I still managed to eradicate the scale insects. Although many experts say that this is difficult to do and that it's just better to get rid of the infected plants. But this is not true. You can watch a video on my channel about how I got rid of these scales using only natural remedies. In this video, I will show you how I bring them back to life. Many people ask if it's possible to leave orchids in the bark media when rehabilitating a sick, dehydrated orchid. I will conduct a short experiment with this dehydrated orchid that survived the scale insects without an upper growth point. This orchid is severely damaged by the scales and almost irretrievably dehydrated. It grows in the bark substrate. Please remember these characteristic holes and marks and the damage that was left behind after the scales attack. For the purity of this experiment, I am examining the orchid because I want to make sure it has a chance of recovery, and I'm going to take it out of the pot for that. Here I can see most of the roots are severely dehydrated, but I wouldn't want to cut them off for now. There are also several young green roots that have recently appeared, which is a good, encouraging sign. Green buds of the growth point are also visible, possibly either new roots or a future baby orchid. I need to water this orchid abundantly by submerging it in warm water, spraying it, and leaving it alone for 3 days. I am sure that nothing will happen because all this time, this is exactly what I have been doing. 3 days later, as expected, there's no change, and while time goes on, the condition of the orchid continues to deteriorate. I would say that in general, the bark is an excellent substrate for healthy orchids, and I have nothing against it. But the bark does not have the ability to absorb water like different species of mosses can, and cannot provide the air humidity around the orchid necessary for successful rehabilitation. Like, for example, when a person is sick, he needs not a hotel room, but a hospital. In the same way, a sick orchid needs special conditions to recover, and I will create these conditions. We have already demonstrated in a video on our channel how to rehabilitate a dehydrated orchid in 3 days in just a plastic bag. You can see the link below if you're interested. But this is a more difficult case, and it'll take more time to recover, and therefore there will not be enough light in just a bag, and the necrotic plant tissues can start rotting. This is why, in this case, I'm going to make the intensive care unit differently. For that, I need a large, spacious, clear glass container, like this vase. Also, I will need moss that could be either alive, or dried, or preserved. Living moss, of course, is much better, because it will not darken over time, and it will continue to grow and remain fresh. I am preparing warm water, somewhere around 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. Then I'm going to soak the moss in the warm water. Without pulling the orchid right out of the pot with the bark, I'm trying to avoid any additional unnecessary damages. I'm going to simply put it in a vase and surround it with the warm moss. Temperature is a catalyst for biochemical reactions, so I hope that the warm moss will speed up the recovery process. Air exchange and circulation is very important, so I will cover the moss with a non-woven material, which is known to allow air to pass through, but retain water aerosols, and therefore it will allow me to maintain a high humidity in the vase without hindering air exchange. It is known that non-woven materials are often used to make medical and surgical face masks and hospital gowns for this very reason. Time's up. Now let's see. As I expected, in this case, it will take more time. When the orchid is almost irrevocably dehydrated, 2.5 weeks have passed. Here is the same orchid with the specific characteristic damage to prove that this is not staged. The orchid has partially restored turgor. Degeneration processes are noticeable in the leaves due to the damage from the scales. Chlorophyll is destroyed, and instead of it, yellow-red pigmentation is visible due to the concentration of carotenoids, anthocyanins, and xanthophylls. Most likely, this leaf will soon fall off, like an autumn leaf. But now it has recovered because the orchid, like all living things, it tries to survive by giving all of its strength to it. Look at this. Actually, I didn't want to make this video because I thought the resuscitation was not successful until I saw this one. The orchid had a baby in just 2.5 weeks. Although orchids are considered sloths of the plant world and are very slowly growing plants, in such conditions of so-called hospital, a dying orchid found the strength to recover. This is normally what happens to damaged orchids without leaves, crown, roots, or growth points as they begin to form babies on the basis of a monopodial stem on what is left. Here is my collection of cured plants that I managed to save with this simple method. There are 1 to 3 baby orchids that had appeared on them. As on this orchid that has lost its crown, there are 3 young baby orchids, one of which I have already separated. Or on these orchids that have lost their crown, orchid babies have grown, and they will soon replace the damaged mother plant. So what conclusions can be drawn? Do not rush to throw away a sick orchid. Give it a chance. Dehydrated, without a leafy crown, orchids that have lost their root system, or orchid stumps, they can be brought back to life. For an ICU, use a spacious glass or a plastic transparent container closed to maintain the moisture and the air exchange with a non-woven material. Use live mosses, such as a substrate, and if you do not have one, you can use a dried or preserved moss. And make sure to spot pest problems in time. Do not underestimate any of them and destroy them ahead of time until they destroy all your orchids.